Did you know that the most beautiful home I have ever seen cost less than a brand new pickup truck? We're not talking about a cardboard box on stilts. We are talking about real, livable, jaw-dropping homes that people build for anywhere between $17,000 and $60,000. Some even less. And here's the kicker. Right now, in mid-2026, while the average American home price sits between $370,000 and $400,000, the global tiny house market has hit $14 billion and is growing at 6.4% every single year. People are waking up. They are refusing to spend 3 decades paying off a mortgage for rooms they never use. Today I am breaking down 7 budget-friendly tiny house designs that actually work. Not the fantasy ones. The ones real people built, real people live in, and real people save serious money building. But here's what most channels never tell you. There's one design on this list that costs the least upfront, but saves you the most money over 5 years. I'm going to reveal exactly which one and why before this video ends. So make sure you stick around. Real quick, if you're new here, this channel is all about honest, no-fluff tiny home living. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video, and drop in the comments right now. Which of these designs are you most excited to see? Let's go. Before we get into the designs, let us get something straight. Budget-friendly does not mean cheap, broken, or uncomfortable. It means smart. It means intentional. And in 2026, intentional living is the most radical thing you can do. Here's where we stand right now. The global tiny home market is valued at approximately $14 billion in 2026. Over 73% of Americans say they would consider living in a tiny home. The number one reason they give: affordability. And honestly, when you look at what people are building for under $60,000, it is hard to argue with them. Now, what counts as a budget tiny house in 2026? Based on current industry data, we are talking about builds in the $17,000 to $75,000 range. That includes DIY builds on the low end and semi-professional builds with hired help on the higher end. A full turnkey build from a professional builder typically runs $70,000 to $150,000. So our sweet spot today is below that range. Each of the 7 designs I am showing you today fits real budgets, real lifestyles, and most importantly, real building codes. I will also give you the honest hidden costs, because I am not here to hype you with numbers that fall apart the moment you open your wallet. First up is the most popular entry point into tiny living, the tiny house on wheels, also known as a THOW. In 2026, a basic 20-foot THOW built primarily by you costs between $18,000 and $35,000. If you hire help for the shell and utilities but do the interior yourself, you are looking at $40,000 to $75,000. A full turnkey professional THOW now leans closer to $80,000 to $130,000. So the DIY route is where the real budget savings live. Here is what makes the THOW so attractive for budget builders. You skip the foundation, which save you between $5,000 and $20,000 right out of the gate. You also sidestep a lot of the permit complications that come with permanent structures, at least in many states. A real example from a documented 2025 build, adjusted for 2026 prices, a 20-foot THOW with basic finishes, where the owner did all labor except electrical work, came in at approximately $28,000 total. That included a trailer at $7,200, framing and sheathing at $6,800, a composting toilet at $1,200, a compact kitchen setup at $4,500, and licensed electrical work at $3,800. Now here is the honest part. The THOW has hidden costs that people miss. Land rental runs $200 to $600 per month, unless you own land or have a friend with property. Insurance is $500 to $1,500 per year. And because most of those are built to RV standards rather than residential building codes, financing is harder and resale value can be tricky. But if you want the lowest possible entry point into tiny living and you value mobility, THOW is your starting line. Next is one of the most beautiful and structurally brilliant designs in tiny home history, the A-frame. The A-frame has been around for decades, but it is having a massive 2026 moment because of one thing. It is insanely efficient to build on a budget. The triangular shape does a lot of the structural work for you. It is naturally resistant to heavy snow and wind load because the roof essentially is the wall. That means less framing material, less labor, and a lower build cost than a conventional box house of the same square footage. Budget range for a DIY A-frame tiny house in 2026, $25,000 to $45,000, depending on size and finishes. With professional help for the shell, you're looking at $50,000 to $65,000. Some bare-bones shell kits start as low as $8,000 to $15,000 if you supply all the labor yourself. The sleeping loft in an A-frame is natural. That steep roofline creates an upstairs space essentially for free, which means you're not paying for a second floor the way you would in a conventional build. The main floor stays open, airy, and functional. One thing to be aware of: the angled walls mean you lose usable space at the edges. Furniture placement requires more planning, but with the right design, most people report the A-frame feels surprisingly spacious thanks to those dramatic vertical ceiling heights and the large triangle windows that flood the interior with natural light. Here is the one I promised you. 0 building skills required. Ready in as little as 8 weeks. This is the Prefab Tiny Home. In 2026, Prefab tiny homes are one of the best value to quality options on the market. Industry data shows that factory-built tiny homes are expected to see 3 to 5% annual cost moderation as production scales up, meaning they're actually getting relatively more affordable compared to custom builds, which keep trending upward. What does a prefab tiny home cost in 2026? Entry-level prefab models start around $35,000 to $55,000 delivered. Mid-range with better finishes and insulation runs $60,000 to $85,000. The entry-level options are real and include a move-in ready home. The reason prefabs work so well for budget builders who are not handy is the controlled factory environment. These homes are built indoors with precision tools, which means less material waste, fewer construction errors, and no weather delays. The quality per dollar is genuinely hard to beat. The trade-off? Customization is limited. You pick from available floor plans and finished packages. If you want to move walls or add unique features, the price climbs fast and can rival custom builds. Prefab works best when you're happy with what they offer out of the box. Financing for prefab is also increasingly accessible in 2026. Some lenders treat them similarly to manufactured homes, and with foundation placement, some qualify for more traditional mortgage products, which dramatically lowers your interest rate compared to personal loans. This one surprises people every single time. The shed to tiny house conversion is one of the most genuinely budget-friendly paths in the game, and in 2026, it is more popular than ever. Here is the concept. You buy a pre-built storage shed, a structure that already has 4 walls, a roof, and basic framing, and you convert it into a livable tiny home. The shell is done for you. You focus entirely on the interior. Pre-built shed kits in the 12 by 24 foot to 14 by 40 foot range typically cost $8,000 to $20,000 depending on size and builder. Conversion costs for insulation, electrical, plumbing, interior walls, flooring, and fixtures typically run $15,000 to $30,000 for significant DIY work. Total all in, many builders have completed solid shed conversions for $25,000 to $40,000. The key to making a shed conversion work at the low end is your electrical and plumbing approach. A composting toilet and a basic on-demand propane water heater can slash plumbing complexity. A mini-split heat pump handles heating and cooling efficiently. A small solar setup can make the whole thing off-grid for a few $1,000s more. One important honest note: a shed conversion used as a permanent dwelling will need to meet local building codes in many jurisdictions. That means proper egress windows, smoke detectors, insulation to code standards, and in some areas a permit. Always check your local rules before you start swinging a hammer. But for a guest house, a primary dwelling on rural property, or a backyard accessory dwelling unit in areas that allow it, the shed conversion is one of the most cost-efficient ways to get into tiny home living. Let us talk about shipping containers, because this is one where the internet hype does not always match reality, and I want to give you the full honest picture. The sweet spot for budget container builds in 2026 is the 40-foot high cube container. Used ones are currently running about $1,750 to $3,000 for the shell, They give you roughly 320 square feet of interior space with an extra foot of ceiling height compared to standard containers, which makes them significantly more livable. A used 20-foot standard container runs about $1,250 to $2,500, but the space gets tight fast. Here is the reality check though, and this is important. Industry data consistently shows that container home budgets run 15 to 25% over initial estimates because of two major factors: insulation and structural modifications. Steel is an extreme thermal conductor. Without serious insulation, a container becomes an oven in summer and a refrigerator in winter. Proper spray foam insulation for a single container can run $3,000 to $6,000. Cutouts for windows and doors require professional welding and structural reinforcement. Electrical and plumbing still cost the same as any other build. Realistically, a well-insulated, code-compliant, livable container home based on a 40-foot high cube is going to cost $45,000 to $85,000 when everything is added up. That is not cheap, but is durable. Steel lasts, and the modern industrial aesthetic is genuinely hard to replicate with other materials. Where container homes shine at the budget end. If you are building off-grid in a mild climate, you can minimize heating and cooling costs. If you have welding skills yourself, you cut modification costs dramatically. In one container on skids, as a rural, tiny home sidesteps a lot of the permit and foundation complexity. The verdict: containers are worth it for the right buyer. But they are not the budget miracle the internet sometimes makes them out to be. Go in with real numbers. Design number 6 is the modular tiny home. This sits one step above prefab in both quality and cost, but it comes with something that matters enormously in the long run: better financing and higher appraisal value. Here is the difference from prefab. Modular homes are built in factory sections, but assembled on a permanent foundation to meet residential building codes, not RV or manufactured home standards. That distinction is a major deal in 2026 because lenders have become significantly more comfortable with modular builds compared to THOWs, which are still often classified as RVs and financed at higher personal loan rates. That gap in interest rates can represent tens of thousands of dollars over the life of a loan. In 2026, modular tiny homes in the 300 to 500 square foot range typically cost $65,000 to $85,000 at the entry level and $90,000 to $110,000 for professionally finished mid-range builds. Yes, that is at the upper edge of our budget category. But when you run the financing math, the lower interest rate on a traditional mortgage versus a personal loan can actually make the total cost competitive with cheaper options financed at higher rates. In 2026, 65% of new tiny house builds incorporate modular or prefabricated elements, up from just 38% in 2020. That growth means more competition, more options, and downward price pressure on builders, which is good news for buyers shopping in this category. If your goal is a permanent primary residence, if you want the best resale value in the tiny home category, and if you qualify for traditional financing, the modular tiny home delivers the strongest long-term financial argument of any build type on this list. And here we are, the one I've been building toward this whole video. The design that costs the least over 5 years. And a lot of people completely sleep on this one. It is the passive solar minimalist build. Here is what that means in plain language. You design and orient your tiny home specifically to capture and hold solar heat in winter and block it in summer. South-facing windows. Thermal mass in the floors or walls to absorb and release heat slowly. Heavy insulation on all sides. A super tight building envelope that keeps conditioned air in and outside air out. The upfront cost of a well-designed passive solar tiny home in 2026 is $50,000 to $75,000 for a solid DIY or a semi-professional build. Not the cheapest on this list up front. But now let us look at what happens after you move in. Tiny homeowners in general already consume over 54% less energy than the average American household. A passive solar tiny home on top of that design philosophy can cut heating and cooling costs by another 50 to 80% compared to a conventionally built tiny house. Add a small solar array, which runs $5,000 to $12,000 installed in 2026, depending on your power needs, and you're looking at near zero monthly utility bills. Run those numbers over 5 years. A conventional home or apartment might cost $150 to $300 per month in energy bills. Over 60 months, that is $9,000 to $18,000 in energy costs alone. A well-built passive solar tiny home with a basic solar setup might cost $20 to $50 per month in supplemental energy. That is a savings of $7,000 to $15,000 over 5 years, just on utilities. Now let us talk about incentives honestly, because this is one area where the script needed an update. The big federal residential clean energy credit, which was that 30% solar tax credit, was largely designed for systems installed through the end of 2025. In 2026, the federal picture has shifted. What you should actually be focusing on right now are state-level energy incentives, local utility rebates, and the simple reality of rising electricity costs across the country. Electricity rates have climbed steadily, which means every kilowatt hour you generate yourself is worth more than it was 2 years ago. The financial case for solar on a tiny home is not about federal refunds anymore. It is about long-term energy independence from a grid that keeps getting more expensive. The passive solar minimalist build is not the flashiest design on this list. It does not have the industrial cool of a container home or the mobility of THOW. What it has is a financial logic that holds up over time. It is the design built for people who are not just escaping a mortgage. They are escaping energy dependency entirely. That is why it is my pick for the design that saves you the most money over 5 years. And why I save it for last. Quick cost comparison segment. Design type: DIY or entry range, pro or mid-range. 2026 secret sauce: THOW, $18,000 to $35,000, $40,000 to $75,000. Mobility or no foundation cost: A-frame, $25,000 to $45,000, $50,000 to $65,000. Structural efficiency: prefab, $35,000 to $55,000, $60,000 to $85,000. Speed: ready in 8 weeks. Shed conversion: $25,000 to $40,000. Mostly DIY. Lowest entry for shell. Container: $45,000 to $60,000, $65,000 to $85,000. Durability or industrial look: modular, $65,000 to $85,000, $90,000 to $110,000. High appraisal or financing: passive solar, $50,000 to $75,000, $80,000 plus. Lowest 5-year total cost. Let me bring it all together quickly. Here is your full 2026 breakdown across all 7 designs. THOW, $18,000 to $35,000 DIY, $40,000 to $75,000 with professional help. Best for mobility and the lowest possible entry floor. A-frame, $25,000 to $45,000 DIY, $50,000 to $65,000 semi-pro. Beautiful, structurally efficient, loft space essentially for free. Prefab, $35,000 to $55,000 entry level, $60,000 to $85,000 mid-range. Zero skills required. Fastest move-in timeline. Shed conversion, $25,000 to $40,000 all in. The most overlooked deal on this entire list. Container, $45,000 to $60,000 budget end, $65,000 to $85,000 mid-range. Durable and modern, but budget creep is real, especially on insulation. The 40-foot high cube is your sweet spot for space to cost ratio. Modular, $65,000 to $85,000 entry level, $90,000 to $110,000 mid-range. Best long-term financing and resale value. Passive solar minimalist, $50,000 to $75,000, with the best 5-year total cost of ownership of any design on this list. And across all of these, remember to budget an additional 10 to 20% for hidden costs. Permits run $500 to $3,000. Land rental is $200 to $600 per month if you do not own land. Insurance is $500 to $1,500 per year. Tools and equipment add $1,500 to $5,000 if you're doing significant DIY work. These are not optional. Build them in from day one. So there you have it. 7 budget-friendly tiny house designs. Real 2026 numbers and no fluff. Here is what I want you to take away from today. The right budget tiny home is not necessarily the cheapest to build. It is the one that fits your lifestyle, your land situation, your skills, and your long-term financial goals. Those 4 things are going to be different for every single person watching this. What I can tell you is that the tiny home movement is not slowing down. The market hit $14 billion this year and is still climbing. The people doing the research now, running the real numbers, and making intentional decisions are the people who end up living in something they love without drowning in debt to do it. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 7 designs are you most seriously considering? Drop in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found this video genuinely useful, share it with one person who is thinking about going tiny. You might help them make a better decision with real information instead of internet hype. That is exactly what this channel is here for. I will see you in the next one.